guys, my name is Lauren Hollis and I'm lucky enough to be here with Hawkeye Consultancy, the two dynamic sisters, Alicia and Katya. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of the interview, by all means, please do check that out. We will have that here, or here. And you can click and watch both of those with all of the information that we have covered so far. What we're going to be talking about in this episode, though, is what does re-reg and audits look like? And I think that there are certainly a lot of people out there who maybe haven't been through an audit in several years, or who are coming up for their re-reg, or who are thinking about going through this process, and they don't know what an audit looks like. They don't know how to prepare themselves. They don't know what sort of interactions they should be expecting. Certainly those that maybe haven't had an audit in 6 or 7 years are quite fearful, I think, of kind of how they're going to be approached. And I think they think that there's a big shining light that's going to come and ask all of these hard questions. But you guys do have a lot of interactions in relationship to performance assessments, ASCOR assessments, things like that. What is your guys' experience with the regulator and with audits and performance assessments, and how do you focus on preparing your clients for that process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I can see why people are daunted by the experience, particularly, since 2017 and the ASCO being quite ruthless in that regard. But I think if I could give any advice, it's definitely that they are being a lot more educative in their approach, and they are being a lot more helpful and understanding. Most auditors are quite pleasant to do with their people too, so I would highly suggest that you treat them just how you would want to be treated. I think that the first process to start with looking at that process is they'll make initial contact with you. That normally is the CEO listed on training.gov. It's normally just an introductory email / formative email telling you that they are going to audit you. They'll detail the scope of the audit in that email, and they'll request some prelim information. That prelim information is normally an attachment with an Excel spreadsheet that has 2 tabs within it. The first tab is just an overview or a snapshot of your qualifications and your single units of competencies and how you've delivered them, the delivery mode to which you've delivered, how many you have issued qualifications for, etc. And then the second tab is a list of student data that you need to prepare. It has the student's name, contact details, email address, and what qualifications.
The enrollment for 12 months, and then followed by the 6 months of units of competency.
Exactly. So there's 3 tabs. I said student I. The second tab is used for them to contact your students, so they will contact them and ask them a series of survey questions, which I don't necessarily certainly agree with some of the questions in there. There's one around marketing, and it always seems to be flagged at an audit that students were incentivized, and why have they been incentivized to undertake study? But that one's always a bit of a curly one, because students could be incentivized or motivated for several different reasons, like they wanted career advance, or it doesn't necessarily mean they've been paid.
For example,
so it's that's an interesting one. But I think if you're able to just be prepared for that question or justify any potential answer there, that's good to know. And then the third tab is for the 6 months worth of data. So if you are just fee for service, so if you're a fee for service provider, they'll look at the data that you've completed, so enrollments and completions within the last 6-month period. And from that, then they will actually pull the student sample. So we have seen a bit of a mix between auditors and how they actually send through the request. So once you send back that prelim information, they select that data. I would highly suggest that you review your data before you send it. So just have a look at it, make sure that it's complete. You'd be surprised how many data sets that you can pull from a system, particularly different systems. Please make sure that, I highly recommend that you make sure it is correct. Do a little bit of a cross-reference. sometimes, data gets pulled and it may be missing information or it may not be accurate. So just have a look at that. And then from there, they present a second request, which has that audit sample and all of the necessary documents. The second request is a lot of information. So they'll ask for things like your links to your marketing and social material. They'll ask for information around your business plan and overview, your training and assessment, any third-party material or third-party websites and their material that's utilized. They'll ask for a suite of policies and procedures around the student journey. So things like your credit transfer, recognition of prior learning, any enrollment processes, schedule of fees, complaints, appeals, and things like that. They will
with that request as well. I just might touch off on any policies and procedures as well that you're supplying. The auditor will really want to see and understand what that framework is in its entirety. So making sure that you're supplying, I suppose, the policy, but the other supporting documents that support the policy. So looking at that framework and including what evidence you have towards self-assurance in particular.
Yes. They will request evidence of industry consultation, your training and assessment strategies, learning resources. So they normally pick a sample of units. They don't look at every single unit. They normally pick a sample and based on that student delivery data. So we have noticed that it tends to be depending on the size of the organization and how many enrollments you've had, but we haven't seen anything been more than about 20, 30 for those kind of larger organizations and students. And they do only tend to be the full enrollment process for the student, but then only the units of competencies that they select out of each call, and they group it by qualification. They do look at their risk priority. So when they're pulling the data, and this is why it's important to look at your data before you send it, they will look at units of competency that could have a perceived risk or maybe have work placement attached to it. Or use assessment conditions. So if they've got, that the assessor maybe has to hold a Cert 3 in hospitality for 3 years, things like that. So have a look at those. They will look at that. And then they'll
duration of units as well, I find, is another interesting one.
Because remember, the data actually can tell interesting stories about a student's progression. If a start date is indicated, say, for the 1st of March and then student is still a continuing activity in September, why hasn't that student progressed through their journey? And what support was offered to them when they weren't progressing? And what were the touch points? Did you follow to your procedure that was in your student handbook that you would have passed to the student to make them aware of your progression policy? So the data really does tell interesting stories. And particularly
on the other side, if they've been enrolled for a year, but they did 8 out of the 12 units in 4 days.
Exactly. And you don't offer, because they will probably pick that instance and they'll want to see, was that done as a cluster? And then also, is that appropriate volume or has it just been an error with the data? Yeah. So they'll want to get an understanding as to why, and they do.
Your prereqs is the other area that I always check as well. Like if this unit requires 3 prereqs, can you see within the data? Well, hold on a second. You start and finish those 2 units on the same day, but one's a prereq for the other.
Exactly.
And they will likely select units that have prereqs, and they'll select the prereq as well as the requisite unit so that they can clearly see in the paperwork, not only in the data that you've reported it, but that the paperwork actually shows the prereq was done prior. Yeah. So it's really, really important that you check that.
Yeah, because again, that would flow back to, your framework document obviously wasn't followed. The policy that you have in creating a training and assessment strategy has gaps in it. And worrying gaps, which would mean that generally that's a systemic issue across all of the qualifications, which might not be the case, but that's how they will think. So the data really important.
And then the assessment material, the learning material, they'll request that for the sampled units. The request we have noticed that they have, because it's an off-site audit, they're doing it virtually. They're definitely asking for electronic copies of resources, but also login details to be able to access your student management system or your LMS, wherever you are holding those electronic files. I would highly suggest, as an auditor, please don't ever give the auditor like a full login. And I know some people may not agree, but I feel like give them a login. But if you could maybe set up a class that just has those students in it that they're sampling, or just has that information that you need them to see. And you don't want them potentially looking at other things that they don't really need to have access to anyways. And sometimes they could go digging and look, bring in other clauses that weren't relevant to the audit or to the scope at that time. And I know that sometimes maybe sounds a little bit backhanded, but I would probably just stay away from, not giving them a full admin login. I don't think they need it.
There's so much information sitting in those systems that it can be really hard to, and you also don't want people in that mindset of like, anything I put into this system, a regulator could see it, because then all of a sudden you get staff that don't want to put information into a system.
I'm afraid.
Do you know what I mean? Like if I stuffed up or something like that. So we always set up, if it's Accelerate, you can set up a domain for auditors, transfer the students into that domain. They can only see what's in that domain. That's a nice, easy way of doing it.
I recommend doing that. Or if you can even download it into a PDF, that they don't need to then try and, because it is a cost recovery now. So if they're trying to, figure out how to maneuver through a system, you're paying for that. So if you can make it faster for them by downloading a PDF that they can just look at on the screen, that will also be a more effective way for you. It costs you a little bit more, but it's better than ask for the time to figure out how to use the system. And then supporting videos for things like facilities and equipment, and they'll request that. So they want to see how that at a per unit of competency level. Very important that you have all of the required material. So things like the equipment, facilities, are they matching the assessment conditions, the unit of competency? Do you have any additional material that's listed in your assessment or training material that you utilize? Has that been captured in your training assessment strategies, or is it captured in a facility checklist or whatever you might use? So making sure that you provide that, because they do ask for it. And RPL.
And if you're saying that you're going to hire equipment in your TAS, where's the receipt from where you hired it?
Exactly. Or like if it's a lease agreement, where's the lease agreement for that? Does the lease agreement cover the full duration of the course? The schedule. And
for cost providers on that as well, does the lease cover the amount of students that you anticipate to be in the classroom? Is it specific to the 20 or 20 hours of study duration? And do you have access to those classrooms for that time? So very important for the cost components.
An RPL kit, they'll request normally for only one qualification, and some auditors don't request it.
Yeah.
And they normally ask in the prelim if you deliver RPL, and then if they don't see any RPL data, or in the data you submitted and you've said no, we don't deliver it, then they'll likely drop that off, just because it's more for them to look through, and it's not included in the scope because you're not delivering it. But be aware, if you are, they will ask for that. Just on that too, and with the RPL, they may say RPL kit, but really it's only the sample of the unit that's getting selected. So if they're looking at 2 units from a full qualification, you don't need to send the full RPL kit. You only need to send the 2 units that are getting selected for audit. And then trainer assessor profiles, they'll request them. They'll want to see how you've determined that the assessor meets the requirements of the standards, has vet PD, industry PD, things like that. Any policies for onboarding of trainers and assessors? Are you verifying their credentials? And what does that onboarding process look like? Is there any policies and procedures that lie behind trainers and assessors?
Your experience with like the level of detail they're expecting to go. So for example, we get this all the time, like the question I always get asked, if I don't hold the unit, what level of detail do I have to go to?
Yeah.
So I always say, if you don't hold the unit, you should be going to an element level and actually like at least saying at the element level how you meet it. And if you do that robustly, I've never been in a situation where they want to go even further unless it's, you know, like AAT or something like that. So I find if you're sufficient at that level, like if you start up at that level, you're good. But what's your guys' experience with that?
Yeah, we the analysis pieces as a minimum, they should be covered. And what you really want to do is you don't want the assessor to just copy and paste exactly what's on TGA. Anyone could do that. You need to be painting a picture of what you actually did in that particular role at that time that allows you or that maps you back to this those particular skills. So basically just giving the auditor a story of what you did and how you did it. But yeah, definitely making sure that if they don't hold it, you conduct that mapping analysis. And the PCs at a minimum. We've never seen any auditor request any more than that.
Yeah, well, it's just the supporting evidence that would support that statement of the mapping.
Yes.
And that is very broad, and it has been subjected to various auditors' interpretation of what's acceptable evidence and what's not. One thing that I would just be mindful of is any supporting evidence that you are putting in a trainer and assessor profile is that it clearly identifies the activity undertaken or the work experience, the trainer in the instance, and then the time frame for which they were in that role. Sometimes resumes are sufficient, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they'll want additional supporting evidence to support the resume. So that might be a reference letter from somebody that they had worked with. And we have
job description.
Job descriptions aren't as favorable only because it's still another form that an external party might not have signed off unless there's an actual like sign off area. Then it's strong. But again, we've had auditors that are happy with all of that, and then we've had auditors where they wanted evidence of pay slips for that particular period. In particular for those like RII units where they might have that stipulation of the trainer and assessor requirements, or foreign kitchen management has units very similar where they have to be in industry for a certain time. So and on that note as well, when they are in industry, making it very specific to that unit. So if you're conducting the mapping analysis for cake, is it prepare cake? Dessert. That's it. There's two of them. One of the units has a particular requirement, and so I think making sure that the actual work experience is mapping to that particular unit, but that you've actually considered that instance on the resume for a 3-year period. And it needs to be specific to the PCs in particular for unit requirements. For example, they might say, I worked in a Chinese restaurant for 3 years, and then they've talked about everything that they've done in the Chinese restaurant, but haven't mapped anything to do with producing cakes. That wouldn't be strong evidence, right? We've
even had auditors go and look at the website and go, well, that menu doesn't give an option to that. So how did that person do that?
Well, you don't do breakfast, so how can you have done breakfast things?
So
or
sure you check that
restaurant, so you've never touched meat, or all of those sorts of things. I mean, that's really important for when you're, hospitality, that's always the biggest one, is like how you're managing work-based placement, and does the work-based placement actually have the opportunity to do all of the things that you want to do? Pastries, hot and cold desserts, seafood even is not, hugely popular across all of them. So, yeah, it's interesting.
It is. What else will they'll then ask, well, this is all in the same request, by the way, sorry. This is why people get daunted by it. They'll ask for validation documentation for the last 2 units. Some auditors we have noticed in the first request, though, will ask for the validation register so that they can then pull 2 units from it. And then we've had other auditors where they'll just say validation documents for the last 2 units that you have validated as per your organization's register. So they'll want to see the register, any policy that you have, and in particular, making sure that your policy states who can be involved in that validation process. You know, that they have to have a TA or be in consultation with industry and a TA, whatever that your practice looks like. And then they'll want evidence of actual validation. So what has been undertaken, what were the improvements? So what was the outcome of that validation and how has that improved your practices?
And on that, if anyone is using external consultants to assist with validation, making sure that your organization is endorsing the particular findings is crucial. So a validation report from us wouldn't be, I suppose, sufficient enough to show that you've actually internally analysed our findings and then endorsed it. So we have added that to the back of our validation, but just be very mindful that if you are using an external consultant, that there is some form of evidence that supports your organisation has analysed the findings and agreed with the findings and then endorsed the particular recommendation. So that's quite crucial.
We do that on all the assessment tools that we sell. We have a little section in the beginning of the mapping guide which says, hey, right, so you have to do a quick validation of this, write down the date that you did it, who undertook it, and what your findings were. And that just sits in the mapping guide. So when that gets implemented, that's the first thing that it's expected to be done. So
and it's so important. The shelf product they have to, or bespoke product you need to do that. You need to show how you've reviewed it at audit. And then they'll get into governance documents. So things like your certification documents for the students sampled, and they'll look at things like continuous improvement register, any continuous improvement policy documentation that you have, and your I already mentioned complaints and appeals, didn't I? What else? Risk management register, if you do have one. And then any like third party arrangement information. So making sure that the third parties listed on your ASQUAnet are accurate. If you're a CRICOS provider, that they're on your your agents, in this instance, third party agents, that they're listed on your website and that information is matching what is also in prisms. So that's ASQUAnet too. And then what else for third parties? Any monitoring activity or any monitoring policies that you have in place to ensure that you're reviewing their practices.
And they'll usually ask for one copy of one written agreement. If the written agreement is different for each organization, they'll probably ask for a copy of each one that is different from the stock standard. But in that instance, we always recommend just having the one framework for the third party, and they just all have to follow the same, I suppose, written agreement. That way you're meeting the requirements of a written agreement. And
making sure then in the lead up that you've actually documented that in ASQUAnet, like the amount of CRICOS in particular, that will make sure that prisms is dead on balls accurate, but then don't bother going into ASQUAnet and actually making sure that they've updated their information in there.
And I actually think that might be somewhat of a information or knowledge gap available on ASQUA's website, because a lot of providers really don't consider educational agents as third party providers, but
they have updated it.
Yeah, they have updated it. We gave feedback to Kai and the ASQUA team and just said, oh, it's a bit ambiguous, that particular guidance, wasn't it?
But know what it is, and you can just say that they do marketing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's such an easy, like it's one of the few things that's really easy to do in ASQUAnet is update your third parties. And I'm like, dude, it's like the one thing that you can do that the system always processes, that it does make mistakes on. Like, just go and update it. Just go and update every 3 months. Jump in, make sure it's accurate. You know, if someone's gone, if someone's there, because by doing that regularly as well, you're actually showing that you're proactively managing it. Whereas if the only time it gets updated in 3 years is, 6 months before you have an audit, it's like, come on, guys.
kind of then alludes to the fact that maybe you're not doing self-assurance activities on their behaviors. And that's why we would never recommend a third-party agreement go for a 3-year period. I think those renewals of a contract is that opportunity to conduct that particular performance assessment on your third party, and then documenting it. If you're still happy with their performance, they still meet the fit and proper person requirements, and you're satisfied that they're a good partner, then offer them another year contract.
Yeah, exactly.
And on that, I would probably highly recommend that individuals really consider when they are onboarding third parties that they get them to complete the fit and proper person declaration, in particular previous and past associations. It really highlights when they fill it in, honestly, that is. It really highlights, I suppose, their previous associations and business dealings. Just helps you get a better understanding of who they've actually been a part of. If they've identified that they were a third party of an organization that had lost a funding contract, I'd be trying to find out why. And I want to know, was it the third party's fault that they lost the contract? Were they a part of that particular event that allowed them to lose the contract? So really vetting them before you engage.
So knowing that this process can be a little bit overwhelming, if clients do want to get some help and support in this matter, what is the best way for them to get in contact with you guys?
Well, there's lots of ways. They can contact us directly through our website. They can email our info line. They can call into our office. We're based in Southport on the Gold Coast. Everyone's more than welcome.
And I actually know our phone number. I can probably give you our phone number. You know your mobile number, though.
Oh, I know my mobile. Yeah, I don't have it actually.
Well, I'm happy for anyone to give me a call. My mobile is 0417 058 451. And I'm sorry I don't know the landline. But we can give you Lauren the details, and maybe you could put it down in the chat.
That's right.
Lauren,
we'll just all of your contact information is below in the details. If you guys are, especially in the Southeast Brisbane area, you're thinking about doing a registration, you're thinking about doing a re-registration, or you just need some general compliance support, I do strongly recommend that you reach out to Hawkeye Consultancy. The more interactions I have with you guys, just the more I'm impressed with your organization and how passionate and how much you really do love the industry and wanting to make it all better. And that's the kind of people that we should be promoting. So guys, you can find all of that information down below. I really hope you've enjoyed this series. We will have all 3 parts of this interview, which I think we probably ran for an hour and a half in the end, up on the website, up on our YouTube page under our interviews channel. All of Alicia and Katya's details will be there. Guys, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time and for sharing all of your wisdom with our audience. Last words over to you.
I just off on we forgot one crucial thing about the re-registration, and just making sure that anyone has had that completed within the 90-day prior to the expiry, which is very crucial and one thing that we forgot to mention. But thanks for having us, and hopefully we'll see you guys around in the vet space.
Right, guys. Well, make sure that you do follow Katya and Alicia on LinkedIn, and we will link to all of their socials and details below. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you've enjoyed this series. My name is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services.